A COVID spike and the final stretch of the campaign. Welcome to your political perch.
Hey guys, and welcome to the Political Perch Podcast, a bi weekly podcast that talks about current events, politics, presidents, history, and anything that is plaguing the United States of America. Join us.
Hey guys, welcome. It's Ashton,
And I'm Andy.
and welcome to another episode of Political Perch. It is the 27th, and we are looking at the final week of the campaign. Andy, it feels like this whole year has been weird. It's felt like it's gone on forever. Um, how you feeling?
Nervous, honestly, Ashton. As much as we've been predicting a Biden win coming into next Tuesday, I'm very nervous, as I know a lot of Americans are. Either way, however you spin it, I'm nervous for next Tuesday, but also a little excited at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's always fascinating at this point in time in election to go back and watch clips from other elections. Obviously, this time 4 years ago, it was a lot of, you know, I would say drape hanging in the Clinton campaign, and like watching the national media during that, it's kind of fascinating. And then just 8 years ago, how Mitt Romney was starting to fall behind, and how a lot of those staffers said that, we hope the polls are wrong, and they didn't. They ended up not being. And then watching some clips from 2008 and how people are trying to piece together how possibly McCain could do an election day miracle. He didn't. So it's kind of fascinating, and I hope everyone listening to this, we appreciate you guys listening and stuff. This one's going to be a little bit different than our typical format. It's a week out, so we're probably going to do another one before the election, if not maybe two. But it kind of depends how much news comes out. Because, Andy, I have a feeling there's going to be more things coming out.
Yeah, Ashton, there's always a lot of October surprises as October moves into November and we vote November 3rd. So I just interested to see if Trump tries to do any more like last second tactics, maybe another laptop or maybe this time an iPhone hack or something. Who knows? Maybe Biden will come out with something will be on Biden. We'll see. But anything is possible as we're only a week away.
Hmm. All right, Andy, we'll go into our first topic, which is kind of the update on early voting and stuff. Andy, I'll go ahead and kind of just put out there general, I guess, warning or notes. As someone who is very analytical and statistical, I want people to know this is a weird election. This is an election we have never seen before, this type of pandemic. We don't know how that impacts the vote in the sense of who votes when. So people need to not read into early voting too much. And I feel like a lot of people on both sides have been doing that. Notably in Texas and Florida for Democrats and Republicans. Um, don't read in too much. You can see trends sometimes in early voting. Sometimes you can see strengths and weaknesses of the campaigns. But in general, this election, I think, is on pace to break 2016's pretty easily vote total. And whether that's good or bad for Trump, that's a matter of opinion. I personally think that's a bad sign for Trump. But in general, Andy, let's dig into these states and kind of get your reactions. Um, so far, we'll start with Texas. 70 or 7.8 million votes cast. What's your reaction to Texas as they reach 87% of their 2016 total with a week to go?
You look at that, Ashton, and you say 87% of people that voted in 2016 have already voted. And that's before actual in person, voting. Now, We don't know how many people are actually going to show up for election day, November 3rd. I think it will be, as in terms of people voting on November 3rd in person, I think that total number will go down just a touch due to COVID. But I think overall, like you said, total turnout will be up higher. Specifically for Texas, if 87% of people have already voted, it seems like there's going to be more people in the state of Texas that can vote. Texas, as we have seen the past years, every single year, every single election, demographically has been changing. It has becoming more and more less white. There's been more Hispanic presence in the state. You know how close it is to the border, especially the southwestern part of the state, El Paso and places like that. So, you know, I think this early voting is going to hurt Donald Trump. Is it enough to lose the state of Texas? We don't know 100%. I still am a believer of Texas still holding for the Republicans this time around. I think 4 years to 8 years is when it will switch finally to the Democrats. But I know, Ashton, you're a believer that Texas can flip Democrat, but it's a perfect storm for it to flip Democrat. And Texas isn't just one of the many states. You look at Florida, a big crucial key state. They're over 67% of the 2016 vote. North Carolina is over 71%. It's just not boding good for Donald Trump so far.
Hmm. I will note on that Texas that there have been some, let's say, reports coming out that the youth vote is coming out at like 40 times the rate this election. Now, does it, again, I don't want to read too much into this with certain states because we don't know if Democrats will, we don't know how the vote share will split up. It's impossible to know. Now, there comes a certain point where mathematically it gets pretty hard to win in a state if like you get a certain amount of lead on election day in early votes, and that lead makes it where you have to win 85% of the on election day vote. It's not impossible, but it makes it almost mathematically impossible, or not impossible but very hard. Texas, Andy, I was coming around to the theory with the polls and stuff that it was starting to look like what you said, where um it wasn't in play for Democrats this time, but they would get close. They would do a better work, kind of 3 to 1% type deal. I'm really convinced now that Biden's going to win it. I think it's going to be close, but I think Biden will probably win it by a percent or two.
It'll be interesting to see, Ashton. I really do think Texas is one of the most untalked about. I won't say it's not talked about, but no one's really, at least the Republican side, thinking that Texas could be lost. I think they're thinking more of you look at Florida and Michigan and Wisconsin and places like that. But if the Republicans lose Texas, if Trump loses Texas, it's over. Nothing else could win because if the Democrats win California, Texas, and New York, it's just almost it's like 95 or higher percent win rate for the Democrats at that point. It's so hard to win the big three or the big two, California and Texas, and lose the election.
Yeah, Andy, I just want to note too, because how the Republicans are approaching Texas kind of reminds me how Democrats approached Michigan in 2016. It's kind of like a thought that, oh, we could never lose Michigan. It's gone for us for 40 years. Why would in the world would Texas ever go for a Democrat? Like, that makes no sense. You had an anti gun Democrat get within 2% in your Senate, and that's with low turnout. Imagine when
And
turnout is high.
Ashton, that anti-gun Senate Beto O'Rourke was going against Ted Cruz in a time when COVID was not a factor. So he almost won the Senate seat without COVID being the factor. Add in COVID this time, things could turn out differently.
Hmm. So Texas is looking interesting. Montana is weirdly high voter turnout. I don't know what that means. It's like this is why early voter turnout stuff is hard to talk about because you don't know who's turning out in most of these states. Only a few states report the registration. Even with the registration, it's hard to read the data because you don't have all of it. The best way to read data is with all of it. So I think it's interesting to talk about, but people need to not like draw conclusions right now about what's going to happen off of that data. You can have a theory. Let's Montana's interesting, but let me go into Florida because I actually did a deep dive in the data whenever I had some free time a few days ago. And it was pretty interesting to me because I told you, I was like, hey, Florida right now, you have more Trump counties mailing in their ballots on percentage, and you still have Democrats with a 300,000 vote lead. Um, if parties go one by one, and then you have 1.3 million non-affiliation voters. I don't know if you disagree with me, Andy, but I'm pretty sure non-affiliated is gonna go like 65, 70 Biden in Florida.
Yeah, I mean, I can agree with that. Usually, you look at the debates if you want a marquee kind of a thing to look indicator. When you have the two candidates out there and you're undecided, or you don't have a party, which one is more appealing to just be like, okay, he seems the less chaotic guy. So, like you said, 60 to 70% probably would go Biden, or at the very least 55-45. But I still give a edge to Biden for the ones without parties
Mhm.
or undecided.
Yeah, and what I was trying to explain to someone who was a Republican person saying, "Oh, we're in a great position in Florida right now," or they said we're in a awesome position. I was like, I was like, it's okay to say that you're in a competitive position, which Trump is in Florida. Don't get me wrong; he's in very competitive position, but the difference is if he goes into election day with, let's say, 80% of the vote done in Florida, which I think is realistic, that looks like it'll be around there, 80%. And Democrats just have a 300,000 vote lead. That's if they split non party affiliated perfectly. Perfectly split it. They won't, but perfectly, and they come in there with 300,000 vote lead. That would leave 20% of the electorate left, which would be around 2 million votes. Um, that's assuming if turnout is the exact same as 2016. If it's higher, I don't think that's a good thing for Trump. So let's discount, let's say it's lower, it stays 2016. That's 2 million votes. You are in a 300,000 vote hole. That means you have to win around 57, 60% of the on election day vote in order to overcome that hole. That's if you're only in a 300,000 vote hole. And by all accounts, like, if Democrats return all their ballots, you're talking about maybe a 500,000 vote hole, but again, we don't know that yet. So if it's 300,000, that means Trump has to win 60% of the election day vote in order to pull out a win.
I think you look at the Trump campaign. I think the biggest problem that we're seeing is that them as a whole is they do not know how to. I wouldn't say maintain a lead, but you look at Biden. He's had a consistent around anywhere from 6 to 10 point lead from basically the beginning of the year. With COVID and all that. And the Biden campaign, he was vice president under Barack Obama for two consecutive um, cycles, 2008 to 2016. So he knows how to be in the lead. He knows how to maintain it, say all the right things, do the right things, go to the right rallies, right political ads to maintain that lead. I don't think Trump's ever really been in the position to have that lead. And even if he was, I don't think he under the campaign knows, at least with his personality, how to strategically maintain that. And I think you look at a lot of his campaign ads, a lot of his direction these past couple months have always been about damage control and weird attacks that really haven't worked. And you're seeing this kind of failure to swing voters' minds in places like Florida, like we've said, and Texas, and other states where he won in 2016 that it might cost him the election this time.
Mhm. Yeah, you can clearly see why Trump wanted to kind of bribe a foreign government to make a fake investigation about Biden. You see why he wanted to do that because Biden is inconvenient. He's an old white dude. He doesn't come off as scary and socialist, even though he still says that about Biden. But in general, it's like Biden is very not a great candidate to run against for Donald Trump. He can't scare people into hating Biden as much as he's still trying. But going back to Florida, the returns, I will say, Biden has been underperforming a little bit with Latinos in polls. We'll see if that holds. Miami-Dade is still only 46% in. Again, I know Republicans are automatically assuming, oh, that's a great thing because that means Democratic turnout is low. Well, you have to understand not every Democrat is going to view the election the same way, and not every Democrat's going to vote early in every part of the country. You're going to have some parts of the country where Democrats vote on election day exactly like Republicans. Um, Now, do I expect Republicans that to be more of a trend? Absolutely. But it's that's why this stuff is kind of hard to read into. So, Andy, we'll go ahead and do one more state, and that's North Carolina, which North Carolina has some interesting data points you can kind of look at. Because they have the percentage of voters who didn't vote in 2016. And this is very fascinating, Andy. So, they only do this for I believe, in person votes, and in the in-person votes, which is 2.6 million, so in North Carolina you have a lot more in-person early voting than mail-in. It's like 60% in-person voting. But you have right now, when it comes to party registration, Democrats hold around a 90,000 vote lead. And out of all the votes cast so far, 76%, Andy, were people who voted in 2016.
Wow,
23% did not.
that's a huge. If almost a fourth did not vote, you're seeing a bigger voter turnout in North Carolina. And North Carolina was a state that was a Trump state in 2016. Now, we're not entirely sure. You can never be 100% sure how this will affect the 2020 results, but you would have to really just suggest, kind of guess, that this isn't good news for Donald Trump for turnout in North Carolina, which North Carolina really is a 50-50 kind of state with their demographics, right? They have a lot of rural, a lot of Republican, but also in the big cities like Charlotte and Raleigh and Durham and stuff like that, there are more Democratic liberals there. So will this turn out be worse or better for Trump? You got to think that it will. It's not looking good for a Trump campaign if almost a fourth of the people in North Carolina that didn't vote are coming and voting this election.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, Andy, it's going to be interesting how it impacts everything. Let's go ahead and transition into um what I would say are best case scenarios for both candidates. Andy, I'll let you get started. What's your best case scenario for each candidate? It can be kind of vague. You don't have to have exact electoral votes, but what's your top tier best case? It's a like one. I would say your 10% chance that candidate just that's it even shocks you how good they do.
I'm going to go ahead and start with Biden in my best case scenario. I think he's a little bit easier to do. I think easily the first state you got to look at is Biden would win Texas. Best case scenario. He keeps all of the states like California, not California, Nevada and Arizona. He keeps those states. He wins Iowa in a flip. He keeps Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. He wins Ohio. He flips that state back, keeps Virginia, keeps New Hampshire, wins all of Maine. He can win North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. And I think I'll stop there. I think that is the most realistic best case scenario for Biden. That gives him at 413 versus Trump's 125. So that's still a huge margin of victory for Biden. I mean, just a crushing defeat. That's his best case scenario. I still think you could be interesting there. Maybe give him South Carolina, maybe give him Montana and Missouri, maybe, but I wouldn't go that far yet. Let's flip it over to the Trump side of the aisle. He would keep Texas. He would swing Arizona. He would swing Nevada. Those are very iffy states for him to do that. Keeps Iowa, gets Florida, gets Georgia, gets North Carolina. I mean, at that point, you're looking, I mean, even it'll be tough to see how he gets the other ones. I think he gets Ohio. That'll be a best case scenario. And at that point, really, I got to stop there. I really don't think he wins any of the Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, even in his best case scenario, which gives Biden a 274 to 264 win. So his best case scenario is still borderline losing and maybe winning. But I gotta give a Biden a win no matter whose best case scenario comes to fruition.
Hmm. Okay. I'll go ahead and do my out of margin or like very unlikely Biden win or the best for him. Um, I could definitely see a world where if the polls are wrong on the side of Biden as much as they were in 2016 for Trump, you're talking about Biden will pick off some surprising states. Um, so in best case scenario, I already see him winning Texas. He would win Texas, Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, possibly South Carolina. Or he could pick off one of the three of South Carolina, Indiana, Missouri. Um, I think he would win Montana. He would win Alaska. Um, I think Kansas, Nebraska are possible. Um, that's probably about it. Maybe Mississippi if it's a true blowout and it's like 15-16%. I don't think that's going to happen, but maybe Mississippi if African American turnout is like as high as I think it could be. Um let's
And
go
obviously, you would give Texas to Biden as well.
yeah, Texas, maybe Louisiana. Like you people need to realize Texas is going from 50th in voter turnout to number 1. That is not really good sign for the incumbent. That's typically not a good sign. Um, I mean, some incumbents have raised enthusiasm and stuff, but the difference is none of them were polling at 43%. And I'm pretty sure increased enthusiasm in voters for a president polling at 43% Andy typically isn't a good sign. But let's go to the best case scenario for Trump. He would win Texas, Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, Ohio, and Iowa decently easily. Um, it wouldn't be close. He would pick off Pennsylvania, uh, Nevada, and Arizona. He would keep those. Um, he would win Minnesota, win Nebraska 2, Maine 2, and then oh man, I think Michigan's gone for him. I don't think he would win Michigan. Wisconsin, I also think is gone for him. So I think he would win by a like electoral vote of like 1 or 2. I think in that case. Uh,
In that case, if with what you said, all the states would go to Trump, he would win 296 to 242. Oh wait, and then give Alaska. You would give Alaska to Trump, so Trump would be 299, and then Biden would be 239 at that point.
yeah, that it would be a weird map. It really would. Actually, I would I would give Minnesota to Biden. I would
With
still
that, with that, it would be 289 for Trump and Biden with 249.
yeah, that's what I think is his best case is running the table on the rest of the swing states besides Michigan and Wisconsin. Um I think Wisconsin's going to revert back to being like a decently I think he's going to lose it by like 5 or 6 points. Yeah,
Yes, I really do think your best case scenario map for Trump is about what it would be like. With me personally, I do think Pennsylvania would still go for Biden. I just think, but it's a very close state, and that's really the only difference between me and yours map, really, which would give Biden like a 1 to 2 point victory there. But it still would be very you would and Trump really doesn't have a possibility of blowing Biden out in this election.
no, I agree with you. I think I saw some people putting maps of California going blue or red. And I was like, "Oh, he." Some people are like calling me crazy, but I think Trump's gonna win every state. you're smoking crack.
Yeah,
You are
there's no
smoking
way. I
crack.
mean, there's enough people in Los Angeles, San Diego, areas like that alone to make it so California really will never be Republican. New York also, New York City is just it's just too big to do that. Brooklyn, places like that. It's just impossible for it's really I wouldn't say there's never going to be a candidate in history that wins every state, but the chances of that happening is like less than 0.0001%. It's so difficult.
And Donald Trump, the president, polling at 43% will not be that candidate. I'm
Exactly.
yeah, it's just I think there's a lot of bad polls coming out currently. I some of them I saw a Michigan one that had Trump up, but he was winning half of the African American vote. That's just laughable. Laughable. Um it's just crazy polls like that where there was a other poll. I think they did a Arizona and Florida poll, and they weren't polling for new voters. They only took voters who had voted in 2016, which, as we have seen so far in North Carolina, that's not a good idea. Just taking out a fifth, or you could say a quarter, a fifth of the electorate in every state. So, Andy, we'll move on to our last thing. We're going to talk about when we think the election will actually end. Uh, I'll go ahead and let you start, Andy. How do you think election night's going to go? What states are going to be called early? What states are not going to be called? How long does the election last? Are we going to go through 2 weeks of Florida 2000, but with the entire country?
This is going to be a historic election for multiple reasons, and honestly, I don't think the election's over on election night, unless Biden can win Florida, Biden can win Texas, Biden can win all these states that will just shatter every single. He wins all these in-person votes. That it doesn't really matter at that point. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think Texas will be Trump and Florida will be Biden. But I think I think Trump does it well enough on election day to keep it close enough to allow it to go further. And I think that's where it gets very tricky to kind of predict how it will go. Because I think both me and you agree that Biden's going to win this election, but it's going to be tricky when we have a president that we've known has for weeks and weeks and months have been attacking the election process with calling mail-in voting fraud and all these kind of other things he's been doing in the attack on the post office because of said fraud and quotation marks there. So there's no telling what he could try to pull. We know he's a incumbent president that's not really about law. He says he's about law and order, but he then goes and breaks said law. So we know he's got it in him to do things like that. So I think it's going to be at least a couple days when they count it all up for Biden to be declared the winner. But it's going to be interesting to see if I think Trump will leave office, but I think it will be interesting to see what he does afterwards. Will he try to get lawyers involved? Will he try to get his people involved? But I think Biden wins. I think it's going to be, I don't, if I just to guess, 3 days after. So November 6th is when it will be finally called. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to say the least.
Yeah, I think it's called on election night. I have a kind of non-regular view on this. I think Biden's going to win, and not win election day voting, but I think he'll split it 50-50, which given his early vote leads in some states, and I think he has leads in states that don't report that type of thing until election day. Um, I think it comes down to Ohio and Florida. We've gone into this just because of how certain states count their ballots. Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, unless if it's like such a wave election, which I don't, besides maybe Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin are not going to be called on election night. By election night, I mean till like 5 or 6 a.m. in the morning. Um, Florida, I think, will be called for Biden around 1 a.m. I think it'll be called 1 a.m. in after Florida and Ohio are called. I think Biden's going to end up winning Ohio too by like 2%. The second that happens, Trump doesn't have a path basically after that because Biden's going to get Michigan. And just with Florida, Ohio, and Michigan, it's game over. Biden already won the election at that point. Like literally, he has electoral votes after California comes in to be declared president. Um, Other states I could think that will be called on election day. Um, Maybe Texas if the I don't anticipate. I think Texas is going to be like a week long thing, but if turnout is really surprising, he could win it surprisingly before Georgia and North Carolina. That's the weird thing is, these states can swing like 15 points between presidential elections. A lot of people don't realize Indiana went for George Bush for like 15 points and then Obama won it by like a small margin. And those swings can happen. It's rare, but they can happen. So Texas possibly, just because how Pennsylvania and Wisconsin does it, like I said, they're not going to be called by election night. New Hampshire will be called, I assume. Colorado, Virginia, New Mexico, pretty easily. The West Coast states. Um, it wouldn't shock me if Nebraska isn't called. Um, that's going to be a weird one for Republicans. South Carolina, I don't think will be called. Ultimately, I think Trump wins it by like 2 points, but I do think it won't be called on election night. But I will say I don't think it's going to end up being a week long thing. I think technically Biden wouldn't have won the presidency until after Michigan is called, and I don't know when Michigan will be called. I think it will be called on election night, but it will be after Ohio and Florida, just because of how mail-in votes are counted in those two states versus Michigan and the Midwest states. And those are like to get to that 270 number, like I'm just looking at it right now, like if Biden wins Florida, but no other state is called and Michigan isn't called, then even after New Mexico, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, and California, he only has 245. And that's like 1 o'clock in the morning. Um, if Ohio is called, then you see 263. So Biden needs 7 votes. Like, if he somehow like you could possibly see if Minnesota is called, like that would be his backbreaker. So if Ohio and Florida get called and he ends up getting Minnesota called early, game set match. All right, Andy, that is everything for this time. Thank you guys for tuning in. Please like, subscribe, um just listen to the podcast on your drive home if you want to in Google Podcasts or in Apple Play. If you're on YouTube, please just like, subscribe, comment if you can. We appreciate all of our daily listeners. Please post comments or not comments, questions, and we will try to do a like question mailbag before the election. I know me and you, Andy, we enjoy doing that. Do you have any last second comments?
Make sure you guys go out to vote. Either if I think it's too late in some states for mail-in voting or absentee voting, but go do early voting if you need to. Go vote on November 3rd, but please do your American duty. I don't care who you vote for, but please go vote.
All right, guys. Thank you for listening, and this is your perch.